First off, thanks for being here today and taking some time to chat. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Henrique Teixeira, who is a Director of Strategic Relations for Ripple in the Americas, focusing largely on Latin America. Before that, he had a lot of banking experience. He's worked HSBC, SWIFT, and others all around the world, but with a specific focus on Latin America. So thanks.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And then Eric Bethel, currently the Executive Director for the World Bank in the U.S. Before that, you had a long career in private equity. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe tell us a little bit more about your current role and what you're doing with Ripple.
Sure. So I joined Ripple about 2 years ago. I was working in Singapore, based out of Singapore. And when we decided to invest in Latin America, they have invited me to move to the region so we could launch our operation here. And we are hiring people and opening a legal entity and investing on that right now. I'm based out of New York. My current role is really to manage the relationship with strategic partners. So before Ripple, I was working for SWIFT in Belgium, and then to several banks as HSBC, Citibank, Deutsche Bank, Itaú, and also Amex. So yeah, that's in a nutshell the last 20 years of my life.
And you, Eric, tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the World Bank.
Sure. En 3 minutos o menos, yo creo que había un señor que dijo que si fuera en 3 minutos o menos le daba una parrilla antioqueña, no sé. No sé si prefieres en español o inglés, pero yo represento. I'll switch to English. I represent the United States on the board of directors of the World Bank. My family is originally from Cuba, but I grew up here in Miami, and I work in Washington. And my job is to sit on the board of directors of a very large multilateral institution, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, which is the World Bank, that includes the IFC, IBRD, IDA, MIGA, and ICSID. And annually, the World Bank Group deploys $80 billion every year, and it's going to grow in the next 2 years to $100 billion. The goal of the World Bank is to take people out of poverty. Prior to doing this, I was confirmed by the Senate, nominated by the President last year. Prior to that, I spent 25 years making investments in emerging markets companies in Asia and in Latin America.
Super, thanks, sir. So I guess over the last few years, there's been a fair amount of enthusiasm about blockchain in the financial industry. But I sense that over the last year, certainly the last few months, more skepticism about how impactful the technology will be on banking. And I think in part, there's a sense that deployments haven't been quick enough. And there's still a lot of talk, but not a lot of real systems in place. So, and Henrique, I'll start with you. Is that a fair assessment? I mean, Ripple is clearly doing things in this space. Maybe you can speak a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, our experience, it depends really on the use case. So we have seen a few players, they were doing POCs and working in sandbox with one specific player was playing with 146 use cases around blockchain. Of course, we don't believe all those use cases will be successful. Perhaps just a database would be enough to some of them. But what we are doing at Ripple is really the Internet of Value, how you move money, the same way you can move information today. So if I'm sending an email, it doesn't matter where you are. The email will arrive in your inbox in a few seconds. And we believe we have to evolve with the cross-border payments into that front as well. So we have been very successful with this cross-border payments use case. We have around 200 financial institutions and banks that are implementing the solution. And we believe if you find the right use case, blockchain can really be very successful.
And these are systems people can use today. I mean, if folks want to, they can go to one of these 200 banks and send money cross-border.
Right. So until 2015 and 2016, the banks were more playing with blockchain, and they were doing POCs, pilots. But as 2017, we stopped selling pilots, and we are just selling commercial use cases and really production contracts with the banks. So we are not doing pilots anymore. The technology is proven that it works. The banks are transacting money around the world. So as of 2 years ago, we stopped commercializing pilots, and we are really focusing on production contracts now. Yeah. So we do have many banks in the world and in Latin America region using blockchain technology through Ripple to send money cross-border. Yeah.
Super. And Eric, the World Bank has been fairly active with blockchain as well. And I read earlier this month they launched, I guess, the secondary market trading platform for bonds based on a blockchain system. And I believe actually then traded and issued a bond that had been issued on the blockchain, making it the first bond to be issued and traded in the secondary market on blockchain. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that project or other projects that touch on blockchain.
To be clear, my job on the World Bank is not on the technology side, but I think that our office has been pushing the bank very hard to implement new types of technologies, disruptive technologies, either blockchain, artificial intelligence, et cetera. About a year ago, the World Bank launched well, let me peel this back a little bit. The World Bank has a AAA credit rating. The way the World Bank, simplistically speaking, I'm going to overgeneralize and oversimplify. The World Bank issues bonds at, believe it or not, LIBOR minus. It's a AAA credit-rated institution, and at LIBOR, let's say minus, ballpark, 13 basis points. It takes that, and then it loans money to Indonesia, to Kenya, or whatever, at LIBOR plus 50 ballpark. And that's the spread. Now, the World Bank issues hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bonds. So we did an experiment, and we said, let's do a blockchain-enabled bond. We call it Bond I like the letter I. You can Google it right now if you want. We worked with an Australian bank, and what we put on the blockchain was a lot of the back office stuff, custodial and so forth. All of that is blockchained. There were 6 buyers of those initial bonds, 5 or 6, and it was basically a private trade. And more recently, what we've done is we've created a secondary market so others can buy and sell these bonds. I haven't seen what the prices are, but if you issue a bond at par value and you compare it to other bonds, I'm going to guess, my presumption is that the blockchain-enabled bond will trade higher than the others simply because you're eliminating several middlemen. And so we'll see how this evolves. It's a small bond offering, just to be clear, so there's not a lot of liquidity, but it's the first step in a much broader plan to experiment with a very exciting new technology that hopefully leads to something more interesting. And I can talk a little bit more about that later.
I think it was 81 million, which, you know, not large by World Bank standards, but still a significant amount of money issued on the blockchain. So, Henrique, let's talk a little bit, I guess, more specifically about Latin America and the opportunities that Ripple sees there, and sort of what you're, who you're targeting, what business, and again, specifically around Latin America.
Sure. So Latin America was, it is one of the most important regions for Ripple. It was one of the last regions that we decided to have a base and to hire employees. But we have seen a lot of momentum now. So we have many banks in Brazil, in Chile, Argentina, Peru, Mexico, in Central America, Caribbean. So we are growing quite fast. The banks are implementing different use cases. Sometimes it's more B2B and corporates. Sometimes it's remittance. Some of them are implementing inbound, the other ones are implementing outbound, but all of them are looking to reduce the costs, increase the speed of the transaction, and also to have transparency of the flows. And this has been very successful in the region because Latin America has different currencies among the countries. Those are exotic currencies that don't have, it's not an FX, it's a very regulated market. The FX market is not open. So it's important to have a technology that could help the banks to open more doors, to transact, to send flows and receive flows among the RippleNet members.
And just to put things in perspective, most people probably know a SWIFT transfer could take 2 business days, probably at least, and is a fairly expensive transaction. What is the time to send money cross-border with Ripple and a relative cost?
Yeah, well, the transaction can be online real time. It takes around 3 to 5 seconds to confirm a Ripple transaction. I was sharing with this audience yesterday that I went back to Belgium 3 weeks ago to send to shut down my account, my Euro account, and send the money here to US, and the money has not arrived yet this morning, so it's taking a long time. So the technology that is there, but especially the business process that you have behind the technology in the correspondent banking world today is broken, right? It takes too long, and you don't have the information. So when I went to the branch manager, I asked her the classic questions. So when is the money going to arrive? She replied, I don't know. And I said, okay, how much is going to cost? And she said, I don't know. And then I said, okay, what is the FX rate? I don't know. So, and we really need to empower the customer to decide if he wants to send the money, how much he's going to pay, and if he's okay with the FX rate. And those things you can have with a blockchain technology underlying the business of the banks.
Yeah, even just figuring out where a SWIFT transaction is at could be complicated because you don't know where in the messaging protocol, the message has gotten lost or is sitting on a desk needing processing. But that's fascinating, 3 to 5 seconds. And then I guess a question, Eric, again, in the context of Latin America, other than it being a useful technology, how does the World Bank view the technology as helping its mission in Latin America?
Right. Latin America and the Caribbean. I've spent a lot of time over the last year traveling, and again, the goal of the World Bank is to get people out of poverty and to do it in a way that promotes shared prosperity. So you don't want the 5 rich families to get more rich and then everybody else remains poor. So if that's the mission, what are things that you can do to make that mission better? So we've been experimenting, and my office has been really pushing the blockchain initiative to do one thing in particular, and that is to help mitigate, if not eliminate, corruption. I'll give you a few vignettes. I'm not going to say what country or even where it is in the world in geography, but I've met several countries. I've met ministers of several countries, and they're asking for money, and in many cases, their countries are desperately poor, but the finance minister is wearing I wish a Rolex, a Patek Philippe, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 watch. And you say to yourself, what's going on here? So what are the applications, the use cases, in my mind, for blockchain that can help eliminate or solve the corruption issue? So right now, let's assume a given country needs to build a road. The road costs $200 million. The World Bank will wire $200 million to the finance ministry of the country. The finance ministry sends that money to the infrastructure ministry. The infrastructure ministry ultimately hires a contractor and a subcontractor. Along the way, money is, how do I say this charitably, it's leaked. Money goes to different places, and it doesn't all end up in the road. So how do you solve for that problem? So one of the things that I've been trying to push at the bank is to the issuance of what I would call a World Bank token. So instead of sending $200 million to the finance ministry, you send $200 million worth of World Bank tokens, and they go to the infra ministry and down the road to the subcontractor. Now, it does two things, right? It tracks where the money goes, and by extension, you're able to see if money is being leaked and where. Now, at the end use, you're going to have to convert to fiat currency, obviously, because you can't pay for groceries with World Bank tokens. But what you do is you go back to the World Bank office in the country, and the World Bank has offices in hundreds of countries. You go to the World Bank office, and with biometrics, and if you are who you say you are, you show up with your digital wallet. I have $5 million worth of World Bank tokens. If you are the contractor, you get the money. If you're the president's brother, you don't. So these are the kinds of applications that I dream that the World Bank will be able to do. Now, hopefully, countries will still want to work with the World Bank if we do this.
Well, it's interesting because
that was a joke.
Yeah.
If anyone's watching, I hope this isn't being recorded by anyone.
It's interesting, though, because oftentimes people view cryptocurrency or virtual currencies as sort of anonymous or tools or instruments to be used by those who might want to partake in corruption. But in reality, most of them are highly transparent and actually are well suited for what you're describing. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Since you raised the issue of a World Bank issue token, one topic that doesn't seem to get a lot of press, but yet there is a lot of discussion among central bankers about the potential issuance of, say, a Fed coin or some other digital token that's issued by a central bank, as well as just the potential impact Bitcoin and other virtual currencies might have on monetary policy. Do you have any sort of sense of how or to what extent central bankers view virtual currency with optimism or more concern over, say, fears of tax revenue dropping because people can more easily pass tokens and putting cash in a bank?
Look, I'm not a central banker, and all of the comments I make, are my comments. They're not comments of the World Bank, and I do work for the U.S. government. So I don't know that I'm qualified to comment on how central bankers think, but obviously you want to be able to affect monetary policy. You want to be able to track where the money goes. You want to deal with anti-money laundering issues. So I'm sure these are all issues that regulators are thinking about. One thing I did want to point out, though, is that in different parts of the world, digital currencies are starting to really make an impact. If you go, for example, to China today, very few people use cash. Everybody uses Alipay or WeChat Pay. And these are things that are growing in importance. But take China out of the equation. Go to sub-Saharan Africa. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of M-Pesa. That's M-P-E-S-A. M-Pesa is a digital currency that's used. It's a digital Kenyan shilling that's on your phone, and it works with 2G Wi-Fi or 2G cellular service, I mean. So I can go through the history of that, but right now, payments in Kenya for just about anything. You buy a T-shirt on the street, and you basically send peer-to-peer money from one phone to another instead of pulling out actual bills. So there is a growing digitalization of money in places that you wouldn't expect. In Bangladesh, the World Bank invested in a similar company, the IFC, called bKash. So these are things that are going to grow in importance. And with respect to regulation, one of the regulators that I think has been the most foresighted and intelligent is Singapore. So the Singapore Central Bank is also the financial regulator, the banking regulator, the securities regulator, and so forth. And they've created a sandbox where technology companies are encouraged to experiment And then the Singaporean government watches to see how these things evolve, and as they evolve, they issue what I would call intelligent regulation based on the viability of the technology or not. So,
interesting. Now, I guess sort of the same question, Enrique, but clearly XRP and Ripple, you work within the current system. There's no, your roadmap doesn't, you have no intention of supplanting any fiat currency, but working within that structure. But any thoughts about, and again, we'll make it more broad, the regulators that you come into contact with, either directly or indirectly through your member or partner banks, is your sense that is their tone one of optimism or concern?
Yeah, I think 2 years ago or even more, we were spending a lot of time with the banks, with the central banks and with the banks, explaining and educating them how digital currency works and the use cases around it. But now we see a lot of activities from the central banks, even issuing their own digital currency, and we applaud this type of initiative. I think we are far away from the questions they had around Anonymous, or if they were using for the Silk Road or illicit activities. I think they're really trying to understand now how they can use digital currency in different use cases, issuing their own currency and applying that to their market to improve liquidity, also have more competition, reduce the cost for transactions, and use it for the good. Yeah.
Super. Well, I think we're about out of time at this point, so I want to thank you both again for spending some time chatting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.